There is an exit over this way if you'd still like to keep going there. The financial reporting, and I think, thank you so much to Caroline for the presentation just prior to lunch. Real scene setting, where are we, how did we get there? And I think it's fair to say, Craig, both you and I go far back to, receipts and payments accounts. You were talking to trust account audits this morning, and, they're kind of where receipts and payments accounts were back in the day. The whole traverse to where we are now. And we've got a sensational panel in front of us, looking and going forward, looking from both the XRB point of view, from a practical point of view, from a client point of view, from a tell your story point of view. And I'd like us just to do two things before we kick that off. One is to applaud everyone that got through the Tier 1, 2, 3, 4 reporting awards last night. Massive effort, double the number of applicants to try to win or come highly commended in those awards last night than there was the prior year. Fantastic, and I would particularly say congratulations to Zealandia, who we have up here today, who will talk about a little bit about their story, their journey, not the last 500 years to how they've got here, but the journey for that annual report. The importance of annual reports clearly is both the stakeholder point of view as well as a governance point of view. And again, the last quick thing I'd like you to do, let's raise your hand if you are representing a charity here. When you're thinking of that charity, hands up, sorry. When you think of that charity, have you read their full financial statements from woe to go? All 36 pages of notes, all the profit and loss, their cash flow, their statement of equity, their statement of service performance, the whole 9 yards. About half the hands have disappeared, I'm sorry to say. You might not have read them all, but your responsibilities continue to sit there, being part of that governance group that potentially has signed them off. So, I think there is an earth moment that says, yep, there is something really important within them, and we're going to find out today what they might look like in time to come, how we've got to where we are, and some of the stories behind. So think of that organisation as you go. We have on the slideshow behind us the presenters who will be with us. As I say, a phenomenal team who are here for this presentation and this presentation alone. I won't run through everyone because they're in the handbook. It would take another 7 minutes to do that. We know we've got allocated that time so that there's questions at the end. I would start to like Liz. Welcome you to the stage and to cover the presentation. Thank you.
Very much. Thanks, Brendan. It's lovely to have the opportunity to speak to you here today. And I'm going to start by challenging the title of the session because of focus on purely financials. I represent the International Integrated Reporting Council, which is a global coalition of companies, investors, regulators, standard setters, the accounting profession and NGOs. And we're encouraging communication about value creation as the next step in the evolution of corporate reporting. Our mission is to instill integrated reporting and thinking within mainstream business practice across the public and private sectors so that integrated reporting becomes the global norm. We were formed in 2010 post the global financial crisis when it became very clear that financial statements alone weren't telling the full picture of corporate performance, and a greater focus was needed on non-financial value drivers. Factors such as social relationships, human and intellectual capital have become an increasing part of organisational value for both for-profit and not-for-profit organisations. Along with the shortcomings of the financial statements, with their backward-looking focus on historical financial information, there's an increasing regulatory reporting burden, and reporting is often fragmented. The story is becoming lost in the detail. The principles that guide integrated reporting present an opportunity to reduce this burden and improve transparency, governance, and decision-making. And we all know that trust and reputation can take years to build, but they can be wiped out in an instant. So not-for-profits are well placed to benefit from moving beyond compliance-based reporting to a report that emphasises trust and transparency. Now, the development of integrated reporting is based on some key insights that a broader view of value beyond the purely financial is needed. Users want to read about value creation of an organisation over time. We know that what gets measured gets managed, and that reporting can influence better outcomes. And we also know that better, more concise and transparent reporting can help to unlock long-term investment. Many charities are already voluntarily reporting additional information related to their performance, and research has shown that charities that provide more information to donors and potential donors are more likely to increase market share of donations in the following year. The research also suggests that the market will reward charities that are perceived as being more transparent than other similar corporations or organisations. Our framework was launched in December of 2013, and it gives a broader perspective into strategy, governance, performance and prospects, so that a more holistic picture can be drawn and the likelihood of future success be better assessed. And this, in turn, will improve the decision-making ability of long-term investors and funders. It's a principles-based framework that can be tailored to the circumstances of any reporting organisation. And being principles-based, the framework also provides sufficient flexibility for organisations to be able to account for the growing number of global megatrends, such as stewardship and corporate governance, inclusive capitalism, the Sustainable Development Goals and climate change. The integrated reporting framework itself is underpinned by the concepts of value creation, and that is value creation for the organisation itself as well as others, and also a broad range of 6 capitals, being financial, manufactured, human, intellectual, social and relationship, and natural capital. A number of guiding principles underpin the preparation of the integrated report, informing its content and how information is presented. And they include things such as strategic focus and future orientation, conciseness, stakeholder relationships, and materiality. And materiality from the integrated reporting perspective is considered through the lens of value creation. So your integrated report should disclose matters that substantively affect the organisation's ability to create value over the short, medium, and long term. And the final piece of the framework is content elements, and they're in the form of questions to be answered in a way that best tells the organisation's unique value creation story and makes the connections between the elements such as strategy, business model and performance apparent. The integrated report is really the product of the integrated thinking process, and integrated thinking is the organisation's consideration of the relationships between its operational and functional units and the capitals that it uses or affects, leading to integrated decision making and, more importantly, actions. Although take-up to this point of integrated reporting has been greater amongst corporates, I think it's less of a challenge for not-for-profits to move to integrated reporting, because you already are recognising and managing multiple sources of capital that often don't make an appearance in financial or annual reports. You're mission-driven, and narrative or qualitative information can serve an important role in telling your story and how you've been pursuing your mission. Integrated reporting is an appropriate framework for combining both qualitative and quantitative information over a variety of timeframes, and it's also adaptable to new forms of social impact reporting. And finally, the strategic focus of integrated reporting over multiple timeframes is appealing. Not-for-profits face the situation of doing more with less. And this has contributed to not-for-profits operating in a much more strategic manner. There's also a very heavy dependence on a network of relationships with other not-for-profits, with businesses, with government and philanthropists, whose contributions aren't necessarily captured by financial measures. and yet they're fundamental to their operation. Indeed, the role of intellectual capital which is defined as organisational knowledge-based intangibles, may be considered even more relevant to not-for-profits than for-profit organisations, because not-for-profits have such a high reliance on relationships and partnerships. They have a high intangibility component of the value that is created, and there is a high dependence on trust and reputation for their continued success. In this way, not-for-profits are already pursuing integrated thinking, and it's a logical next step for this form of thinking to govern the content of their reports. Thank you.
Thanks so much, thank you. And absolutely, a number of organisations are already partway along that path, ready to go. And as Liz highlighted, it will be easier for not-for-profits than pure commercial to be able to get into that full role of reporting. So thank you so much. Warren, XRV, the setup. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent, and good afternoon. In the time allotted, which this is a very wide topic, and we could spend the entire afternoon on it. So I'm going to concentrate on four areas. One, what's changing in the public perception in this area? What are your stakeholders also requiring of you? What is the response of you, the charities, and what does this mean for the future of financial reporting? And it's really interesting to note that the public perception towards accountability is changing dramatically. There is a real interest from the public now as to how their donations, their subscriptions, their taxes rates, and all other voluntary contributions are utilised. And the competition for the philanthropic dollar is real. And charities, and especially the small ones, need to be super careful not to disadvantage themselves in the market by ignoring the demands of proper accountability and transparency. I personally do not support the notion of exempting very small charities from any form of standardised accountability reporting. You need to be careful what you wish for. And if there is insufficient financial literacy, and I acknowledge that that is a real issue in New Zealand, the persuasiveness or the extent of financial literacy in New Zealand, but if there is insufficient from within your membership of a charity to even complete the very basic cash form of reporting required by Tier 4 charities, then that certainly begs the question, should you be allowed to take funds from the public? How can the public be satisfied their funds will be properly utilised, and will this approach seriously jeopardise the ability of small charities to raise funds in the future? And to give you an example, I was staggered 14 days, between 14 and 15 days of the tragedy in Christchurch that we've witnessed recently. There was 10 million raised on the Give a Little page run by Victim Support. And within 10 or 15 days, the people that gave money to that Give a Little were asking what's happening to it. They were seeking accountability. I thought that was really very interesting. It didn't take too long at all where the chief executive of Victim Support was having to get on TV and say what they were doing in dispersing of that funds. The second, what are your stakeholders? What do they want to know? Well, they want to know what impact, what outcome have you achieved with your operations and with their funds and support. So a set of financial statements alone is not going to meet this demand. And my view is that donors, funders, members of charities are already demanding more performance, impact and outcome type information than a fully compliant set of financial statements. And much more of this information, as Liz said, will be forward-looking as opposed to our historical perspective from financial statements. How should charities respond to this? they need to account for their activities using a much wider set of metrics. Demands are rapidly moving from purely financial reporting to more holistic reporting. A repetition of that word, holistic. The service performance requirement, which has been in place for several years now for Tier 3 and Tier 4 charities, and in January 2021 will be required for Tier 1 and Tier 2, is an excellent start. A huge demand we are seeing for reporting and accountability on social issues. Some examples are climate change, environmental impacts, water quality, remuneration strategies, supply chain processes, human slavery we see regularly quoted in the media, and human rights issues such as inclusiveness. Also, this government's wellbeing framework and Treasury's living standards framework, which has been mentioned today a number of times, are giving a real impetus to this. And the demand for information to assess sustainability, you as charities must convince your funders that you have a sustainable operation that will be able to deliver on the programs, and especially where they are giving funds for a multi-year program. How can they be assured that you're going to be around to deliver on those programs? That is part of accountability and transparency. So what does all of this mean for the future of financial reporting? Well, I think we can stop short of saying that it's totally broken. And financial reporting is clearly now only one aspect of external reporting designed to discharge the entity's accountability obligation. The filing obligations for the charities register requires a set of compliant financial statements, and I'm sure that that will remain. But a set of compliant financial statements just on their own is no longer fit for the future for users of external reports. And a full set of accounting records, even simple cash records for Tier 4, will need to be maintained, but possibly only the key items will be demanded in external reports. And I want to conclude by saying many of New Zealand charities are doing an amazing job in responding to these modern demands. And one of those entities is represented on the panel this afternoon. But we need to have more of you join that trend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Warren. Absolutely, there is a trend, there is more reporting that can be done. Is it a simple cop-out to, as some of the commentary around has been, or maybe we could get an exemption? It is public funds, it's important funds, it's funds that effectively we are holding in trust. Thank you so much, Warren. One of those winners, we are going to Jennifer from the North Foundation at North. My apologies. You're welcome. As a funder, as a receiver, as a multi-reader role.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, kia ora tātou. It's a great privilege to be here, and I'm unashamedly a non-accountant who has spent a large proportion of my last 30 years in philanthropy working with the financial statements of thousands of New Zealand charities. I did once go to a Victoria University continuing education half-day course on accounting for non-accountants, so I got all my wisdom about accounting from that course. But when I was thinking about this, as I alluded to yesterday, I first went to work for Sir Roy Mackenzie in the 1980s, and we made a grant from the Roy Mackenzie Foundation to a very well-known disability charity, and I went to a launch of this particular project to which we made a contribution, and said to the CEO of the branch of this organisation that I was disappointed that there was no mention of our grant in his annual accounts, and he looked down at me and said, oh, it was too small to mention, and I said, Well, that's a shame. It's probably going to be too small for us to bother to fund you again in the future. But two foundation laws. So we are one of 12 New Zealand trusts established from the sale of the trustee savings banks in the late 1980s. So the combined community trusts hold total assets of over $3 billion New Zealand dollars across New Zealand. Foundation North is the largest non-government funder in Auckland and Northland, and our endowment sits at just under $1.5 billion, with an annual grants budget of around $40 million. So obviously we have a really large resource devoted to looking at what applicants for our funds tell us about themselves. We've incorporated the financial reporting standards into our policies and been working actively with others to educate our applicants who are expected to comply with the standards. But from our perspective, there are actually two sides to this. How do we, as the largest philanthropic funder in New Zealand, tell our story, and how do our grantees represent themselves back to us through the application and reporting back process? So we actually have a two-part annual report. Part one is what we call a storyboard, which is where we outline our funding approach and highlight the nearly about 20 of the nearly 1,000 projects that we fund every year. And then part two is our financial statements, our summary statement of service performance, which aims to provide the public with a transparent, easily read overview of our performance, inputs, outputs, and the developing area of outcomes achieved. Now, the interesting thing about this is we were early adopters of this mode of reporting, and obviously you want to hear from KPMG, but they've been our auditors for a long time, and I'm old enough now to say that the auditors are now younger than my children and start to look like they should still be in high school. And one of these very lovely young men came into my office, so we have a 31 March financial year end, and he came to my office and we were doing this for the first time. He said, "So what's the impact been of all of the grants that you made last year?" And I said, "Well, it's the 1st of June. Most of them haven't been paid out yet, and most of them won't be able to report on the impact of for at least 5 years." So it's actually a really interesting question for us as a philanthropic funder about how we measure the impact of what we do. But interestingly, we've aligned our own internal reporting on both our financial objectives and our grant-making objectives into the same format. So around 70% of the organisations that apply to us for funding are registered charities, and our expectation is that they will comply with the standards. What we know, and it's been alluded to quite a lot over the last 2 days, is that particularly for smaller organisations, this is a struggle. The tension for us is that many of the organisations that would most benefit from our funding are the least well-resourced to access it. So, example, in Mount Roskill, near where I live, there are 176 languages spoken on a daily basis. So you have this hugely diverse urban conglomerate in Auckland with really significant minority communities who need the resources to both access philanthropic funding and, of course, ultimately to be able to report on it. On the other hand, I have my trustees, our decision makers, and they want us to be able to clearly articulate to them what do our applicants own, where is their income coming from, are they sovereign, what do they owe, can they fund this themselves, can they manage a large grant, what's the size of their reserves, what are their reserves for, why are they holding reserves, why have they got such big reserves that they're applying to us. So my grants team are required to distill, if you like, all that information into something that will help the trustees, who are the ultimate decision makers, make the decisions that they need to make. So as a funder, we really like the templates. We like the ability for charities to account in a transparent and consistent way, and we think that there could be a greater response from both the regulatory agencies, the not-for-profit sector and the philanthropic sector to actually help the not-for-profit sector get up to speed in this way. There's particular concern in Auckland about Pacifica groups and their ability to both access funding and access the internal and intellectual resources that they need and the kind of cultural capital that you need if you're going to engage in this funding space. comments on it, and so here's just a couple of them. So one member of the funding team said, "It seems like it's more work for charities, but the quality of what they provide helps us to write the reports on them. For foundation law, some of the headings under which we report to trustees are different from the headings which the grantees are presenting to us in their financials. So maybe we need to amend our own internal reporting templates to be more congruent with the reporting. We still think that charities could be encouraged to use SSPs in a much fuller way to talk about their activities. And it was really obvious at that lovely awards ceremony last night that everybody who got up on stage to receive an award had a story to tell. So the Bellyful organisation who provide dinners to families who are undergoing stress, everyone's got a story to tell, and it seems to us that this new way of reporting actually gives the not-for-profit sector, probably for the first time, the opportunity to do that. So the short answer, I think, from us as a funder is that we think that the standards were an admirable thing to bring into New Zealand. They've really helped us to report more clearly, both on our own work and on the work of our grantees, and we'd like to see a more collegial effort across the various sectors to make sure that we help those who need help to actually comply with something that's really, really helpful for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think, from both a funder point of view and also a very unique position that you hold with so many applications and so much financial knowledge and information coming into the organisation. Absolute gems of my teeth. Thank you. Thank you. One of those organisations that I'm sure over their short history have applied for funds to a variety of spots. The Tier 2 award winner for 2019, Zealandia.
Thank you, it's a great privilege to be here. Thank you very, very much. 7 minutes. So, look, I don't have any slides, and I only got one thing I want to say, and I'll spend 7 minutes saying that through a case study, at least I'll try to. And I've entitled this "The Cost of Only Compliance." The latest standards came out in 2015, and of course, like all standards, it's entirely possible to only comply. It doesn't really matter what we're complying with, but we're all actually really pretty creative when it comes to compliance. So I'll slap in a few more figures. They won't be the financial ones, they'll be about something else. I might tell you a story, chuck in a couple of photographs. Cool? But in my view, this comes at an extremely substantial cost. It's the cost of us not telling our story. It's the cost of us not actually communicating what we want to communicate, and using the process of being compliant to do something very, very, very much bigger and more important to an organisation-wide audience. So I'd like to give you a bit of a story, a bit of a case study, a snapshot. In 2015-16, Zealandia, some of you may know this, Zealandia was just about beginning to emerge from a period that had been somewhat uncomfortable, challenging, difficult. And during that period, triggered in late 2015, we started a process of developing a document that looked ahead 20 years. We have a 500-year strategy, hard to write a business plan for that. So we decided to try and make it a bit smaller. And so we wrote a document called Living with Nature. Living with Nature is our strategy statement and statement of vision out to 2035. And then, as that was being launched in 2016, the first requirement to report against the new standards was hitting us. It was for that current annual report. And so we asked ourselves really the question, what do we want to say? And actually, this document here talks about transformation. It doesn't talk about how much money we've got in the bank this year. It doesn't actually even talk about how many people visited us this year. It talks about transformation. It talks actually about transformation across ecological, societal, and business areas. All three. And so we wanted to tell that story. And as you know, transformations don't happen in 1 year, at least not usually. Not in our world, anyway. And the current, the model that we had, the approach we had to annual reporting, to financial reporting, was not going to do it. And so we cast around and came up with, and was, thank you for your presentation, we came across integrated reporting. And we've embraced integrated reporting. We started 3 years ago, so we're now 3 years in. And what this enabled us to do was to tell a story about value, how we are creating value, and by that, how we are transforming stuff. It also forced us to ask the question constantly, so what? It never ceases to amaze me that I will stand up and talk to people about how we have gone from 95,000 to 135,000 visitors a year last year, and nobody ever says, well, so what? So we're asking ourselves that question. And integrated reporting is a methodology that enables us to check ourselves, let alone invite you to check us. So we applied. There it is. It's really intimidating having that top counting down. We applied 4 of the capitals, social, environmental, human and financial. And we started 3 years ago. We're now 3 years in. It is definitely a journey. Our annual report 3 years ago, pretty picture. Yep, so what? It was a first try. What was great was that last year we were recognised through the Australasian Reporting Awards with a silver award, and that made us feel good. Oh, maybe somebody's sort of giving us a hint that we're not doing bad things. And then this year, it was a real great pleasure to be at the dinner last night to receive the Tier 2 award. I'm really grateful to everybody for that. But what actually has been happening? In this process, what we are doing is we're wrecking the podium. What we're doing is we're taking that document, and every year we are asking ourselves, how are we contributing to that? What value are we adding to that? To our commitment for the next 20 years? And if you like, that thing is simply an annual update on progress. That's all. Now, annual updates might have finances in them, but that tells me nothing apart from my health. Well, it doesn't even actually necessarily tell me my financial health, actually. So what we've done is we've got an annual update, and what we're doing is we're using this as part of our toolkit for doing good business, for growing our business, growing our partnerships, growing what we need to achieve that. And so we're seeing the annual reporting process as being something entirely different. And my one point I want to make to you this afternoon is that there is an immense cost in only complying. Actually, the opportunity we've got through these reporting standards is to create something that becomes an integral part of our business armoury and the way we do good business and the way we grow our business. And I think that is the key opportunity facing every single charity, no matter what size it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. How refreshing to hear someone voluntarily wanting to go further, wanting to take on, wanting to create value. as opposed to IPSAS 15's 3.138 says I need to do this. I have to, and can I argue the fact I don't want to? So, you know, wow. And I would suggest everyone in the room go and have a look at the Zealandia site and download the financials, have a look at the total pack of that integrated reporting. 3-year journey to date, 20 years to go. And it will morph and change as it goes. I would also highlight for any of the international tourists, if you're in town tomorrow or Sunday, go up to Zealandia, a short bus ride on, it used to be the number 12 bus, it used to run on time. It could be any bus that heads towards Karori. Pop off as soon as you're through the tunnel, and it's a wonderful stroll through and a sensational spot. So, cool, thank you. And on we go. One of those wonderful sound bites that turns up, you know, almost like waves coming in on the ocean is consolidation. You know, it's been there almost since we were all this high, and we knew we should have, but we didn't. And then we started to, and we had to, and then it sort of said, oh, let's give it a shot, but Charity Services kindly said you can have an exemption for a year or two. But there's another wave coming, as the consolidation standards changed as well. But one of those organisations that's got into it and can prove that many organisations can be consolidated. So we don't need to hear that, oh, I've got 63 leads or 122. You can do it. You really can. And it's a pleasure to have Mark along from Plunkett to be able to run through that or anything else to do financial from Plunkett. So good on you. Welcome, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, I enjoyed that last section. I'm looking forward to checking out the Zealandia accounts as well. Be good. Yeah, so kia ora koutou. I'm Mark O'Sullivan, Financial Controller for Plunkett. I'm here to talk to you today about, you know, it's really a iconic Kiwi brand that I'm sure most of you have dealt with personally. For our overseas guests, Plunkett's the largest provider of free support services for the health and well-being of children under 5 years old. So I guess the major thing to talk about is the move from a federated model into a large single entity, now the Royal New Zealand Plunkett Trust. So we're over 100 years old, so we have obviously quite a long and lengthy history. Originally we had a lot of branches and sub-branches, and over the last few years they rolled up into 18 area boards, and we're managed at an area board level. A couple of years ago, the area boards voted to come together as a single organisation, and the vote passed with greater than 70% of the votes. What that meant for us, though, was that we still had 20 to 30% of people who didn't vote for it, and some of them, were the overall decision. We obviously have to deal with that, and it's a big challenge, but it's one that you need to meet, head on. Walking towards the fire is a term that I've heard used referring to it, but you do need to be resilient, because there's obviously some unhappy people involved. Another thing that this caused as well is it caused a little bit of a destabilisation in the volunteer base, and we're recovering from that, but it's a solid path. But the vote was from the areas, and it was passed. Lots of reasons for it. Two of the main ones would be health and safety legislation. That's becoming more complex and onerous than it has been in the past. There's also the changing face of volunteerism. That was key as well. So Plunkett already had a burning platform, really, mostly on account of those two factors. We already had 4 of our 18 area boards had closed down, essentially voluntarily, and some of the others weren't in great shape either. So that's some of the driving reasons behind it. So transition-wise,
Some of the keys to it was really getting on board people within this room. So, auditors, lawyers, making sure our board was 100% behind it, and leading the charge in the discussions. There's a lot of work involved in transitioning to a single entity. I know there's several other organisations out there who are either doing it or thinking about doing it. Don't underestimate the work involved or the cost if you're going down that path. What it does do though is it highlights a lot of hidden risks and issues, and it does sort of put them in the spotlight. We've learned a lot along the way. We had to identify every lease, every contract. We had to novate them, get them changed over to the new entity. We had to establish the ownership status of
the building that we had, which on the face of it might sound straightforward enough, and you might expect that actually we already had that. But I guess the organisation was grassroots in nature, like a lot of places are. And the length of time, over 100 years, some of these buildings have just been there for as long as we've known them. We had to figure out what the story was with them, who owned them, who didn't, how they came to be. So definitely a lot.
It was complex and it was time consuming. There was a lot involved. Interestingly, the change also gave some people, like some councils, a chance to reconsider some of the previous long-standing informal contracts that we had. Because essentially, again, historic things that in the background
were just happening, but suddenly we're going to say, hey, we need to make a change. We need a contract change. We need a contract at all. There was an opportunity for them to change things that typically wasn't in favour. Didn't think that was either flashing. There were other costs, impacts as well. So that increased costs. For example, your casual R&M on buildings. Previously, they would have been done by Lisa's dad, who's retired. But now, some of that needs to be contracted out. And so not only is that an additional cost, but it also impacts the connection between the community and the organisation. That's a factor there as well. Realistically though, health and safety wise, we really don't have a choice. We can't have somebody's 75-year-old grandfather on a roof of a building, patching a piece of the roof. Grant funding has also been impacted. Now with us being a single entity, we're too big for some funders to deal with, or they don't feel that their grant will make a difference. That's incorrect though. Our community services really do rely on those grants. There's also a community fear that the money raised at communities will be used on big Wellington salaries, if you like. That's correct as well. Typically our community services have been running at a deficit for several years. Financial reporting and how does that link back? Typically grant funders require a geographic area because they fund it, so they require the financials for that. Previously they had audited area reports. Now a lot of the time the best that we can do is management type reports, which works for us, but not always for them. I guess the other challenge is that audited accounts show our entire business, so it mixes up our government contracts and our community services. And that doesn't work great at the moment because both the ministry and the community, ironically, they're both the same concern that they're subsidising each other. And at last count, they're both in deficit, so they're not. It's been mentioned several times that financial reports really need to tell our story and not just consolidated numbers. Totally agree with that. Ideally, from my point of view, segmenting our community services from our contracts in a fully transferred price type model in our audited accounts
service performance reporting. I think that would be brilliant.
It's going to play a really important role in telling our story as well. Yeah, we're a couple of years away from that, but yeah, definitely be a big plus. And yeah, looking forward to seeing that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, how you take an iconic New Zealand brand and put it into one. The trials and tribulations, the risk now associated around, and clearly one of the main drivers, as well as that next step towards what is the full story for the full brand. So thank you so much. Next we have Braden Smith. Braden's one of the colleague partners at Grant Thornton. Very much involved with and signing off those opinions as I do as well. And you know, I think we'll hear and see some random statistics and different inroads into the sector that we might not have otherwise thought of, considered, but bringing a wealth of knowledge and information. Braden, great to have you on.
Thank you, Brent. Well, it's a little bit hard to talk about the future of financial reporting if you don't give a wee nod to the past. So I'm just going to take you back in time a little bit, not 4,000 years like we had a little bit earlier, just 4 or 5. Many of you will recognise this framework. This is what we used to have, just 4 frameworks, nice and simple, nice and straightforward. There was a war on the battlefield. It's a bloody war actually, and 3/4 of the population got wiped out. And really was just one. But if I look at the new framework, you know, if the current state of affairs are moving from the past into the current, if I tot them up now, I get around about. There we go. We get 13. So if I top them up today, I'm up to about 13 different frameworks under which I would prepare financial statements. It's pretty hard for someone like me to remember all of those frameworks, but it's a pretty good list. But we're not here to talk about the past or the present, we're talking about where are we heading now. What is the future? The future of the current financial reporting framework that we're using now is still very new. I think it's really important to remember that. But as for the question, will it change? I think the answer is undoubtedly. Many people will then follow that up with, well, how do you think that will change? And then the answer to that is, well, who knows? It's actually quite difficult to predict, but what I think you can do is you can look at some of the current trends and things happening in the environment to look to where it may lead you in the future. Here's an analysis of 27,500 charities. Okay? This is our charitable sector cut down into the 4 financial reporting tiers as it was in 2017. So what you'll see there is Tier 1 and Tier 2, which are the 2 largest sets of accounting reporting standards for organisations with $30 million in expenses and above for Tier 1 or $2 million to $30 million for Tier 2. And they make up 4.46% of the population of the charitable sector. The Tier 4 sector, which is comprised of entities whose expenditure is less than $125,000, is made up of 71% of the population by number. Let's look at this in terms of assets. When we look at assets, Tier 1 and Tier 2 entities hold 71% or just over of all assets within the charitable sector. So that's 4.4% of the sector holding over 70% of the assets, with our brethren in Tier 4 making up 70% of the population holding a mere 3.95%. What about income? Okay, let's look at that. So income, we have 79% of the income generated by the charitable sector is generated by 4% of the population, with 3.5% of the income for the sector generated by Tier 4 entities. It's an interesting set of dynamics. Very complex. How do you design a framework to deal with all of these things? Let's look first at the larger charities, so Tier 1 and Tier 2 entities. That we're talking about here. Based on our discussions, this is a personal view and based on discussions with people out in the sector, as to the question is, does it work? Broadly, the answer we get is yes. There are still some areas where people will pull out particular things and say this doesn't really work too well and it's a little bit challenging, revenue features a lot in that discussion. But generally speaking, people are relatively comfortable with the standards as they are. There's some size and rebalancing issues potentially around when people drop into various frameworks, but all in all it works pretty well. Where is large financial reporting heading? Well, the place to look when you're looking for changes to financial reporting standards for the not-for-profit sector is the for-profit sector. Now, we have had 4 relatively large standards impact us in the for-profit sector, and it is undoubtedly that variants of these standards are coming towards the not-for-profit sector. There's also other areas which are slightly more specific and relevant to the not-for-profit sector around expenditure, which standards are no doubt in the process of development as well. Also giving a wee nod to consolidation, which is still an area of challenge, particularly for the religious sector. Not alone in that space, there will be more entities affected by that, and Plunket is an excellent example of where that takes place as well. If we just turn to the smaller end of the scale now, so the tier 3 and 4 entities, and again, as to the answer to this question, which is really just based on a relatively straw poll of our client base and people that we talk to in the market, but as to the question of does it work well, broadly the answer we get is no. Okay. Now there are a number of reasons for this, and I'll just bring a few up. Right, okay, so we have tier 3 entities that continue to be challenged by a couple of areas of the accounting. Again, revenue does feature in that discussion, but usually the answer is we have a real problem with the lack of resources in order to be able to comply with financial reporting requirements. Compliance rates are actually quite low. If you go onto charity services and pull down sets of financial statements today, you will still find old gap and differential reporting sets of financial statements being prepared, usually by chartered accountants, I might add, today. So that's something that still needs work. Tier 4 entities don't have a balance sheet now, not in the traditional sense. You line 10 people up, 5 will say I love that, 5 will say I hate it. So again, a real difficult one to sort of manage as well. Size criteria probably needs some rebalancing, leading more organisations into the lowest tier, I believe. But there's some interesting structural imbalances with current allocations as they work, and that's really driven by the tier selection criteria as it works currently. So again, another whistle-stop look at some statistics. So these are for 2010 to 2015. If we look at average assets in the charitable sector, you can see that line is hovering somewhere around about the 250, 300,000 mark. But when you break that down to the median, it drops phenomenally to under $50,000. Now that will tell you that there is a huge number of very small of entities within the tier 4 sector that have significant asset bases such that they can distort the average and the median to that extent. It's absolutely phenomenal. Same happens with equity. Okay, again, the median position for tier 4 entities really struggles to get off zero, and that's because most of them spend everything that they get. On income, same sort of deal. Again, we have some really distorting averages. We have a number of entities that generate good profits, but that distorts the average. The median, again, overall is very close to zero. We tended to see the numbers hovering somewhere between $800 and $2,000 as averages. So what are the challenges? Just very, very quickly now, so I need to wrap up. For the smaller entities, some very large asset holding entities with minimal expenses, some very, very small charities that have very limited resources in respect to financial reporting. There's still obviously a need, as has been pointed out already, to have that transparency and accountability, and we want to get it in a way that I love the template setup, and we need it in 4 pages, not 40, and I appreciate 40 is the situation. But thank you very much for your time today, everybody.
Number of whistle-stop items and things on there. I love it when Brady comes in on a Monday morning. Yes, he's always had a great weekend, but he also comes in with a really fascinating statistic of some sort. He's analysing everything behind the charities, you know, the register and things. If we were thinking, and clearly focused on tier 4, if we were thinking the top 100 tier 4 organisations by asset,
Any random guess of what the value of those assets would be? Just the small tier, just tier 4, the top 100. Their assets knock through just north of 800 million. And yet we're saying maybe less regulation would be good. 800 million hanging out there that not too many people are looking too hard at. What a fascinating, I'm looking forward to next Monday. You know, it'll come with another absolute humdinger. So I guess, you know, when we're thinking back to the Charities Act, the review and things, maybe it's actually a 2-tier approach we need. Maybe it is income expenditure, one of those two, flip a coin, and or equity or assets. You know, are we getting, is the right information turning up in the right spot? Don't know, might turn up in your submission. So, thanks so much, Braden. Excellent. And on we go. We couldn't have either A, the conference, or B, talk about financial reporting and the future of financial reporting without thinking about good Australian colleagues. And it's wonderful to have Mel around. Welcome. And yeah, let's dive into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora. I just want to take an opportunity to thank CLANS, Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, the organising committee, and I also want to thank Charity Services and DIA in general. So we had a really productive day together on Wednesday. It's not very often that we have these opportunities as regulators to meet in person. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who helped facilitate that day. Now, Australia. So I just want to set some context. We had a little bit of an intro to this morning, and I very much thank Matthew Turner for raising the Australian context. We're in a federation in Australia, and it's very complicated, and we have different levels of government, and this just displays the fundraising regulation environment in 2015. Now, different states impose different requirements around reporting and obligations on charities, and then along came the ACNC and a new layer was created. So it's fair to say that it's very complex, and if I think about charities and the requirements that they have in terms of acquitting grants, in terms of fundraising returns, providing us with the financial information that we collect, it's very complex, it's very inconsistent, and there's no sort of uniformity about it. So one of the things that we are tasked with as a commission is to try and reduce the unnecessary regulatory burden on registered charities, which is quite unique for a regulator. Now, this is the current framework in Australia. We have 3 tiers, so a little bit different to yourselves. It's based on revenue. So we look at the other side of things, money coming in, and that determines the size of the charity and the proportionate reporting obligations that attach to size. The vehicle we use to collect that information is called an annual information statement. It's a collection of both financial data elements as well as non-financial information, and we require financial statements from those entities which are in the medium and the large size. So entities that have revenue of up to $250,000 per annum are not required to furnish financial statements. They can, and if they do, we will publish them, but it's not mandatory. Now, we've been around enough time to collect 4 full cycles of financial reporting, and we were subject to a legislative review, which was wrapped up and given to Parliament last year, which has already been discussed. So, at the moment, the requirement for producing financial statements is a bit of a self-assessment for entities in Australia. Entities have to decide whether there are users which rely on the information that is produced by charities. Now, if a charity decides that yes, there are users that rely on information, they have to apply all Australian accounting standards. But if they self-assess that there are not users that need that information to make decisions, then they can adopt some of the accounting standards. So this poses a problem for our peers who set Australian accounting standards, because they need to move and adapt to some international changes which are happening, which is going to affect us, particularly in Australia. Now, when we were created, there was a whole suite of transitional reporting arrangements which were put into the legislation, but they're temporary, they have a temporary nature about them. So the sun will set on those, and the independent review, which concluded last year, found that there was merit for those to be extended, because at the moment there's no consistency in terms of reporting, but entities which are registered with the ACNC, in most cases, if they produce financial statements that comply with their state or territory reporting requirements, we will accept those and deem those to be meeting our requirements. So a big job of ours is to keep working with the states and territories to try and streamline and try and harmonise, but that probably won't happen by the time the transitional arrangements expire. So that was one of the reasons why the independent review panel found that that should be extended. And if we think about parts of the sector, particularly non-government schools, for example, universities, hospitals, those type of entities, they're very highly regulated. So they have other primary regulators that they provide information to. We are just another regulator, if you like, in the long list of obligations that they need to meet. Now, it was very interesting last night for me personally to be at the reporting rewards and for a charity to thank the XRB. I thought that was incredible. I thought that was wonderful, but I thought that was incredible because I think in Australia we're navigating a very difficult environment where the Accounting Standards Board need to make changes to comply with international obligations, and we have a government which hasn't responded as yet to our independent review, and many of you would know we're now in caretaker, so we will go to the polls next month, and so we're wondering what's going to happen out of this review. What will the next Parliament decide to change in relation to the recommendations that were proposed? So we sit and we wait. Now, personally, and I think this has been covered, it's been covered by everyone that's spoken so far, people want to see more information than just the numbers. Some people don't relate to numbers. Accountants do, generally, or hopefully they do, but there are a lot of people who do not understand the numbers, and they want to read and they want to see what organisations are doing and what they're achieving. And I think charities in particular, it's about a purpose. And so I think there is definitely space in the Australian context to include some of that narrative going forward. Now, the only requirement in terms of the financial statements at the moment is the numbers. So I think that is a good start, and I think that's a springboard, but I think we will see moving forward, we'll see more appetite for the words and the pictures and the outcomes and the outputs that charitable entities are producing and achieving in Australia. We certainly put that forward in our submission to the independent review. Now, essentially, you have your service performance reporting in place for the smaller entities, and that's being rolled out to the larger. So I think, in summary, we might be close geographically, but we're at very different points in terms of our reporting journey. But I certainly take a lot of interest in what's happening in New Zealand, and I think we have a hell of a lot to learn from you and the journey that you have embarked on. So we are certainly watching. My peers in the Accounting Standards Board in Australia are watching, and I think we will be the magpie that we've talked about, and I think we will try and cherry pick what's worked well in the New Zealand context and see if we can apply that in the Australian context. But I don't have a crystal ball, so we'll wait and see what happens. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So you've got your eyes set there, therefore very clearly on the fact that, as Braden's slides also highlighted, we have 12 or 13 different sets of regimes to be able to think about, report on, and try to understand and measure. So yeah, there'll be all sorts of